I would like everybody who is online this afternoon, I'd like to thank you for being here. Virtual Consult is a joint effort between Security Specifiers and the Security Industry Association, affectionately known as SIA. I'm Ray Coulombe. I'm your co-host as well as your moderator for this session. And we're also joined online by Jeff Cole, Security Specifiers Advisory Board member and a member of SIA's staff. Jeff, say hello to everybody out there.
Hey, Ray, thanks for having me on, and great to support you guys. And what a great kickoff session you guys had earlier today. So keep up the great work.
Thank you, my friend. So once again here, our sponsors for this session are Ultronics, or for the conference rather, are Ultronics, Aker, Intel, Linnell S2, and Salient Systems, all strong supporters of our consult and virtual consult concept. Also, this will be repetitive if you were on the last session. This session, as all of our sessions are, has been approved by BIXI and as is. So for BIXI, you will receive 3 CECs for attending all sessions today. For as is, you'll receive 1 CPE for each session attended. BIXI will offer another 3 for tomorrow, and the same rules will apply for as is. All I will need from anybody whom this affects is an email. Just send me a request, ray@securityspecifiers.com, and let me know how you would like that certificate made out. The topic today is what's the best way to specify integrated systems? And the session is sponsored by Siemens. Thank you, Siemens, for sponsoring this particular session. Certainly, integrated systems and building systems are a keen interest and focus area for Siemens. So again, thank you. We've got a great panel for you today. First of all, I'd like to welcome Greg Seaton. Greg is with CSI, known as, or Construction Specifications Institute. We normally call you CSI, Greg. And Greg is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Special Projects. Jim Creel is a Senior Technology Engineer with HEPE Engineering. Jim actually started the security practice within HEPE, as well as the ICT practice, I believe. So thank you, Jim, for joining us. And we have 2 of our fine board members this afternoon. Jim Henry, well known in the industry for years and years. He's been recognized by Security Systems News as a legend in our industry. So we have a legend on our panel today. And Jim is now an independent consultant, and he co-hosts a podcast known as The Risk Advisor. And finally, Frank Bashada. Frank is founder and the president of Business Protection Specialists. So welcome to all of you. So with that, we are going to start off here talking about CSI, their role, and the role of something known as master format, which is understood by some and misunderstood by many. With that as a level set, we'll talk about the concept of unified or integrated systems as opposed to specifying components, consultant experiences around those, and also what's the future hold as we move more and more into integrated systems. So I am going to, at this point, for a primer on CSI and master format, again, to level set the discussion, is I'm going to turn this over to Greg Seaton to give us that background. So Greg, if you would, please.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. Give me 1 second. I will share a quick presentation. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but as Ray mentioned, there's often quite a bit of confusion and misunderstanding, both around specifications, construction specifications in particular, and around master format and its role. So master format. Master format is a standard that's been produced by CSI since 1963. We currently engage in regular revisions about every 2 years to update content based on input from users. That's the whole way the thing breaks down. Ray's been a participant in that, as well as a number of the other people who he's worked with. We had a large body of folks who were representing the most recent update to Division 28, which is electronic safety and security. It's work results based, and what that means is fundamentally that each element, each chunk within master format, what we call sections, are defined as something that remains in place after a person applies specialized knowledge and trade skills to a construction resource, typically a product, but not always. And it's used mainly in the relatively early phases, design development and construction documents, to help document the contractual requirements for what's to be built. And its primary use is for organizing the order of specifications inside of a project manual, which accompanies the drawings. This is designed to show you a little bit of the content, a very small slice of the content, to also reinforce the idea of inheritance. That is, as we go down through the content, what we do is we specialize chunks of content, and they inherit what is above them, what is in the parent categories. You can see, if you look at this, that it has an include section that's added information. These are the types of things that are included under this title. And then it also has these C references to describe other things that you may want to look at. As you go further down, you will find more restricted C. C also includes alternate terminology and the like for any given section within master format. And when we get down to level 3, which is where most specifications are written, you still have that same kind of reference material that's useful for making sure that what you write also takes into account the possibility of other locations for that information. As I mentioned, master format is primarily used for specifications, and specifications are not a technical data sheet. They're not a product portfolio. They are specific to the construction process, and they are used to help define the qualitative outcomes for any given thing to be included. They are contract documents. They're required as part of the submittals for the initial bid packages in the case of design, bid, build, or in other project delivery systems, as the kind of things that will be approved by owners that say, yes, spend my money this way. As I mentioned, they describe quality and performance requirements. That's important to note because they accompany the drawings, and neither is superior to the other. They're cross-referential. And by drawings, I also mean building information models. So what that means is you'll have quantitative information, sizes of rooms, number of doors, things like that inside of the drawings. But inside of the specifications, you'll describe the qualitative and performance aspects of anything that's installed. They also describe the installation standards, the way in which something should be installed and what it's expected, how it's expected to perform during commissioning and QA/QC. They also describe other administrative requirements that are there to provide additional general requirements for any given technical section. So they're limited requirements as opposed to the broader general requirements that are provided in Division 1 of master format. Section format is a standard produced by CSI, has been since the mid-70s, and it's designed to show how a given construction specification section is broken out. It provides a general outline in which you put your spec content, the written content that describes these things. It's made up of 3 parts. The first part is general. That is where those administrative requirements go in, including things like warranty requirements and the like. But there are also general requirements that are specific just to that system that's described. Products are where you place essentially the components that will be installed or used. and they can be described in a relatively generic fashion. There usually are product brand names mentioned, but in the case of public projects, it's important that you either provide a minimum of 3 or you just generally describe the expected performance and capabilities of the product that will be used to satisfy the design. And then execution is where you go to see how it should be installed. And that can be something as simple as follow manufacturer instructions, although that is not always recommended. But it can also be the place where you reference something like an ASTM standard to say, in order for this to perform properly, you should follow ASTM standard XYZ that shows something like levelness of a concrete floor or ability of a window to withstand penetration of water driven at a certain speed, that kind of thing. And then under each part of that, there are subsections for things like that are called paragraphs or articles that break down into a hierarchy that allow you to address chunks of each of those parts in a way that makes it easiest for the recipient, typically a contractor, to understand and use the specification to accomplish the ends desired by the contract. These are 4 general terms that come together. They're used by CSI and considered somewhat wholly by CSI, and they are the way in which you describe quality specification writing. Clear, complete, concise, and correct. That is, don't overwrite, don't write in a confusing way, avoid passive voice, use direct descriptive sentences, and make sure that what you write does not contradict itself or the drawings. This is important. We also produce a series of books called the Practice Guides at CSI, and the Construction Specifications Practice Guide is currently being authored. I'm actually leading the authorship of that book, and we expect it to be available early in 2021. And it provides a lot of very direct information to give guidance on the authoring and use and interpretation of specifications. And there we go. That's it. So I hope I hit my time mark, Ray, but that's about where we are.
Well done, Greg. Thank you. I will, if you stop the screen share, I will go ahead and get mine. Okay. And okay. Actually, I don't think we need a screen at this point, so I'm going to stop my screen share so we can see everybody. I will just make a point to you, Greg, on the last thing that you said on the practice guide. So several years ago, when I personally wanted to learn more about this process, I studied for your certificate, the Construction Document Technologist. That relies on that practice guide. So that had me reading that guide from cover to cover. And it was excellent. In fact, when we built a house later on, I used many of the thoughts in that guide to help guide the architect and the builder. So for anybody that, whether you want a certification or not, that wants to know about the process and how to interact with the design community, or if you're a designer, how to build this stuff, that is a great document and well worth the investment. It's not very expensive, and it's available for purchase on the CSI website. So,
yeah, I was just going to say, Ray, we just came out with 2 of the 4 new practice guides. They're both available. The new project delivery practice guide, which is the one you mentioned for the CBT, and then also the new contract administration practice guide, which is very useful. It's specialized and it's focused on contract administration. And then, as I said, the CS one will be available soon. And after that, we have one for product representatives that I think will be better than previous editions. We've seen tremendous uptake from the new books, and people are really satisfied. Really
great resources for any specifiers library for those who deal with them. Greg talked about divisions. Divisions in the master format are logical groups of related entities. So there's an electrical division. Greg mentioned the electronic safety and security division, which affects us in this industry, as does Division 08, which is openings, or Division 27, which is communications. Sometimes, though, people are under the mistaken impression, and Jim Henry, this is going to be coming your way, that that these divisions are designed to assign contractor responsibility, because quite often all the 08 stuff goes one way and the 28 stuff goes another way. Jim, what have you seen out there as a contractor? Have you encountered that in your career?
Oh, we certainly have, and it's I think most of the time it's from the ignorance. If it's a general contractor that's executing a project, that they don't understand that. I mean, I guess in some cases it's laziness, and it's easy to just throw one way and one another way. But it creates confusion. When Greg was going over the 4 C's. There's a 5th C that you never want to be part of those other 4 C's, and that's conflict. It's very important for integrators, to try and give an accurate estimate, and to not inflate it with a lot of risk, to have clarity as to what their scope is. And and oftentimes an integrator may already have a relationship with a particular client and is understanding overall what the expectations are, as far as ensuring a full operational integrated solution. And yet, we are the recipients in the bid process of the scope documents, the contract documents, from the contractors. In some cases, the end users, but oftentimes, through the GC. And that becomes, a challenge, where that there's a role that you're going to need to play in other areas. But if it's not in those scope documents or sections that they're asking you to bid on, you may give them an accurate number for what they've given you, but in reality, there's going to be a missing link that somebody else doesn't have, or there's going to be missing coordination. So getting that education through to the general contractors, and I think that's the responsibility of the consulting community, as well as the manufacturers and the integrators. The CSI structure, is helpful to organize things, but it really cannot be assumed also to be, a preordained mailing list of this goes to the IT, this guy goes to the security integrator, this guy goes to the door, the door hardware supplier. That doesn't lead to a good solution.
Of course, the classic conflict that we pursued over the years and talked about is Division 08, Division 28, as locks have become smarter and more electronic in nature. And I think the challenge is now, well, first of all, in 28, Greg alluded to it, most of what we see are components or subsystems or single purpose systems, like an access control system or a video management system. But now the world is beginning to change a bit. And we're talking more and more about integrated or unified systems. So let's try to get calibrated on that. So first of all, I'll ask Jim Creel. Jim, you've dealt with this. What's your definition, or what do you view as an integrated or unified system? I think we tend to use these terms interchangeably. Jim?
Right. Oh, thanks, Ray. So if you're dealing with a project in which you have various pieces and parts that don't need to talk to each other. So let's say, for instance, you have a small project with a couple of cameras and a couple of doors that need card reader control, but the client views them. This is one of the important distinctions, by the way, is how is the client expecting you to be engineering these systems together? It doesn't matter what I think if they're integrated or not. If the client thinks it's integrated or doesn't think, that's going to drive a lot of how I'm going to organize this information. So I look at a system is everything that's needed for that specific function to operate. So if it's electronic access control, all the pieces and parts, I don't need a camera to unlock doors. That would be an integration piece if a camera wants to do that. However, if let's say, for instance, they have an intercom and they want the intercom to be able to unlock, answer through an intercom and have it unlock a door. To me, that's part of the physical access control, and I will see if that makes sense to put that within the system. So, to build on what Greg and Jim said, to try to answer this question, because we don't want our specifications to be a scope assignment document, we want them to be documents that help the contractor find what it is they need to know about the system they're bidding on and the system they'll be installing. So for me to consolidate as much as possible on systems, if they're standalone, I want to try to pull everything together in as few sections as possible for two reasons. One, if a general is assigning sections to people and I have 20 sections to cover access control, one for card readers, one for door panels, one for wiring, one for credentials, there's a good chance somebody's not going to get the right section and they'll be missing a piece. But the other part is, from the integrator's point of view, I want to make his life easy. It's not engineers against integrators. We work together as a team. So if I can present the information in a single place for them to go to as much as possible, then that will help. Where we want integration, and this is where it becomes more problematic, is I still look at the individual pieces and parts, what it takes for that system to perform its intended function. But if I need various systems to work together, to exchange information, to cross over in terms of who controls what or who's providing what, that's when I will look at a separate section that's just dedicated to what each of those standalone systems need to be able to do with each other. And I will tend not to write that integration into the standalone platform pieces themselves, other than to have language in there that says refer to or see also a integration specification.
Jim, really, really good insight. I'm going to come back to a couple of points here that you made, but first, Frank, I'd like to get your perspective on what you feel an integrated system is and how you approach that situation where different systems need to operate successfully with each other.
Sure, Ray. And I liked a lot of what Jim had to say. I think, first and foremost, the comment about harmony is super important, and we all have to approach our bit of the work with a level of humility and not create an adversarial, condition between the designer and the installer and putting the owner in the middle of a problem. To one of your earlier points, I would not use integrated and unified synonymously. I think that when you look at different systems working together and communicating with each other, you're talking about two different manufacturers, perhaps. That's an integration, making two systems from two different companies work together. That's an integration. When you talk unification, I think you're talking about a single software platform by a single manufacturer. You're beginning to see a few of those emerge in the marketplace, but more often than not, you're dealing with integrations. So, I think examples of unified systems would be Genetec, Tyco Victor, what Avigilon is trying to do, bringing their access and video under one hood, one software platform. So when you put that in the context of specification writing, I look at it like there's two different types of projects. There's a large project where there's an architect involved, and there's going to be a lot of different architectural divisions in the master format world. And in that arena, you've got to look at a couple of things. First of all, is there a spec format that's going to be required by the architect? And in the last two state level projects, government projects that we've done, there wasn't even a chapter for Division 28. The expectation going in was that security was going to be carried under the electrical specification, which we vehemently opposed and were able to argue for a separate section for Division 28. Then, the next question becomes, is the architect going to require religious disciplines with respect to conformance to Division 28? So that would be a separate spec for access, separate spec for video, separate spec for intrusion as examples. That's not super efficient. There's a lot of redundancy in that. When you look at parts 1, 2, and 3, not so much in part 2, but parts 1 and 3, there'd be a lot of redundancy in that. So that gets to be a bit of a slippery slope, but you have to navigate that with the architect. The other type of project that you may run into is one in which security is the only part of the part of the work. And in that particular case, being that spec writing and drawing preparation is an art form, you may just go in with a Division 28 general that has access, video, and intrusion, for instance, all in one document. The linkage, the key linkages here, I think, to bring all this together comes down to the drawings. Your riser diagrams allow you to show how the inner workings of various systems, and then also your device schedules, where you might say in a particular door schedule, this camera has to work with this door for certain events to, bring all that together. So I think for clarity of the recipient, and I agree with Jim, you have to negotiate the requirements with the owner, do your risk analysis, come up with those requirements, and then representing those on the drawings is an art form. You can do it in various ways to write the specs, through your riser diagram, through your device schedules. Those are all different ways that you can bring all that together and demonstrate the integration or unification that's required. Otherwise, we get into this 6C, which no one's talked about, which is change order, and that's not going to be a good thing. So I'll pause there and let you move on.
So, Greg, back to you here for a second. We've got several questions I'm going to bring up here from the attendees. But if a consultant is sitting down to write a project specification and he feels like the existing numbers are not working for him in a particular context, he's not necessarily obliged to use the current CSI numbers, right? He's got some flexibility there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important, I think, if you are a specifications consultant, that you actually own the full standard and not just a list of numbers and titles. Because the list of numbers and titles is fine if you're just doing a quick reference because you're a product manufacturer and you know where to put your product on something like ARCAD or the like. But if you're actually writing specs, it's worthwhile to not only buy Master Format, the full publication, but also read it, because it covers exactly what you're talking about, Ray. If there's a section that you need that is not currently addressed in the standard numbers and titles, there are instructions in there for how to create your own specialized number and title, where to locate it, how to title it, and what you can then write under it. And I think that is an important part of the art of writing specifications, knowing when the standard numbers and titles meet your needs and when they don't. And that's going to be very project specific. It's going to be the kind of thing where, part of the reason why CSI says that is because we know we're not perfect, and we also know that we don't know everything, right? And also because Master Format, when we put it out, when we publish a new edition, we just came out with the 2020, we come out with a new edition, that is an invitation to the industry to tell us where we've screwed up. And that's what we want. We want people to say to us, hey, you've really forgotten this thing about training. That was one of the most recent ones, right? About training during handover. So we put a section in for 2020 about training for handover, but it's the same kind of thing across the board. So, I absolutely, it's well within the expected use of Master Format that you'll write your own section numbers if the standard ones don't fit.
Thank you, Greg. And to the topic of today, we did add, I think, 2 iterations ago, a section in common work results in the 2805 area for systems integration.
That's right.
Begin to get at this concept. And I'd like to know what what Jim and Frank are doing now when it comes to integrated systems. But I think the way we'll address that is for me to read a question and let the panel comment on it. And this comes from an anonymous attendee. He said, with smart buildings on the rise, how do we see Division 08, 25, 27, 28 come together for specifiers and engineering firms to assure a complete solution for the end user, or that a complete solution for the end user, owner, et cetera, is met? Should you include any CX or functional testing of the system? And if yes, where should it be called out? Is anybody on the panel doing this today? And how are you handling it? Jim?
Yeah. Sure, I'll jump in first. So yeah, especially the Division 25, this has become huge. So about a year ago, maybe a little more than that, within our company, I got pulled into a committee to try to decide how we're going to deal with smart buildings.
Right.
And this is really being driven by our building optimization group. And they've recognized that cabling, network, security, these are all elements that need to be part of a quote unquote smart building. And the problem for them was how to tie all this together. In other words, if somebody's looking, try to figure out where in the specifications they're going to find the information that will allow them to understand what's going to be required of the contractor in terms of the various pieces and parts to make this a smart building. In fact, what they're really looking at is there going to be an industry trend coming up here where you're going to have essentially like a smart building integrator, and their job is to be the umbrella over all the other subsystems, the building climate control systems, the lighting systems, the security systems, the structured cabling and the network that makes it all work. And so we have been working on, can we develop this division? Now it's turned out to be a pretty big thing. I think the more you dig into it, it sort of feels like a rabbit hole that never ends. But there will be. So yes, we are looking at that. And I like what Frank said about unified versus integrated. And this is really what we're talking about. On these systems, it's not so much unified. There's no one manufacturer that makes a smart building. These are going to be integrated systems. And so there is going to be a level of integration. And that's going to be, typically you would see that in Division 28. But now it's going to get kicked up a rung, I think, to Division 25, because they're the ones who have to make sure that your integrated security system works with the integrated building management system, which works with the integrated lighting control systems.
And Jim, just remind everybody what Division 25 is, please.
Division 25 is going to be the building management area of the specifications. Greg could probably speak to that a little bit better, but that's.
I'd be happy to jump in real quick here.
Yeah.
Division 25 is called integrated automation, and it has not been revised recently. And in the last review cycle, we had a lot of in-depth discussions, both in the CSI committee and with others we bring into the discussion who are experts, about the fact that Division 25 is past due for an update. We didn't get the work done in time for the 2020 edition, but it is underway right now. And we are very excited about the possibility of having a revised Division 25 in the next iteration of master format when that comes out. I think also we're currently conducting some experimentation around the idea of the process of integration and the process. And, Jim hinted at sort of a smart building czar or something like that. And I think at least as much, it's the idea of what's called the big room analogy, which is that you need to incorporate everyone's input earlier rather than later and find ways to overcome those divisions between what is expected in terms of their scopes of work, what is expected in terms of their responsibilities, who ends up holding the bucket for this or that or the other outcome, and how do we make sure that the documents as submitted that reflect the intent of the owner also mature to a level where they can actually accomplish that. And we've been looking at potentially expanding and adding a second division, which we're currently calling sort of speculatively Division 20, which would be about coordination and coordination processes that whether or not they're involved in a big room type project delivery system, they would allow folks to have multiple hands in that mix and not just throw everything at some one contractor's feet and say, good luck, make this work. It's a bigger problem than that and a bigger issue than that. So that's where we're coming at it right now. Now, no problem.
It's interesting that as technology changes, we all have to change, including CSI, making your documents reflect the technology and construction trends. And And there's always a lag time there. So you always have this period of confusion where people are wondering what to do. I'd like to ask Frank, how are you dealing in specifications with integrated systems? Are you using existing categories? Are you creating your own? How, as you approach something like this, and as the world continues to become more integrated, what's the approach of business protection specialists?
Yeah, we're able to within our projects work within the existing CSI framework, and I think I talked earlier about whether there's an architect involved or not, and how those variables are going to impact the writing. I think in terms of the question that was posed here, there's a couple of points that you can make for clarity in the spec, and the first is in part one to clearly delineate what work is in scope versus what work is out of scope, and that helps to determine, for in fairness to installers, what's going to be there when they show up to the job site and what are they going to be expected to do. In terms of integrations of the system and representing those, particularly when you get to the commissioning phase, we're trying to drive document deliverables earlier in the process. And for instance, not waiting for record drawings until the job is completely finished, but having a set of record drawings in hand when you're doing the final walk down of the site, and working with the integrator to come up with commissioning protocols and procedures that would allow the demonstration of these integrations or the unifications at the point of commissioning, so that you're really creating a good commissioning worksheet, which then, by the way, becomes sort of a maintenance and when you look at the total ownership of a system, being able to use those commissioning worksheets down the road to ensure that the systems are maintaining that functionality throughout the life cycle of the system. So those are a couple different things that that we're currently doing right now to make sure that it's clear to everybody. And then I think lastly is coordination early and often with other project stakeholders, where you have these touch points and these interfaces, and ensuring that there's a lot of dialogue and that you're reviewing other trade specs and drawings to ensure that all the right things are appearing on the right drawings, and everybody's going to have what they need when they show up to the job site.
And that coordination, those lines of communication really needs to be established early on in the project, don't they? Otherwise, you've got silos or factions who, when they don't talk to each other, we know what typically happens as a result of that. I'd like to shift a little bit towards the integrator side, and Jim Henry, get your take. First of all, David Ray writes, we use the term master systems integrator to hold the keys and responsibility for the coordination and integration of all the required systems. And so save that thought, and I'll read, it's a little bit lengthy, but from Justin King, who says, it's always a tricky balance from the designer's perspective to ensure that the specifications are thorough enough to accurately describe the required scope, but concise enough to ensure that the integrator will read through it and clearly understand the client's expectations. I feel that any time a designer feels burned on a project, there's a tendency to add additional language to the specs for all projects moving forward to avoid getting burned again. This ends up with very long specifications that seem to belabor integrators to read through it all to understand all requirements. I feel like there has to be a better way. Any thoughts? So, Jim, what's your experience? Maybe you can talk about, what are the better written specs that you've seen, and maybe one of the not so good specs that you've seen in this regard. What do you think?
Well, clearly the more clarity, the better. The earlier discussion about some of these subjective areas within CSI, to be able to make sure that you're not trying to straddle and put a round peg into the square holes that you've got there. So I know it's a little bit more reading and a little bit more in the sections to digest, but the clarity is worth the effort. And whether the integrator is defined as a master systems integrator or not, he ends up getting drawn into that anyway. So what's better to have a level playing field on when you're looking at numbers, from integrators that are bidding a job, is to truly understand what their coordination roles are. And I couldn't agree with the comments made earlier that the sooner that is identified and that coordination is made, is the better. I mean, oftentimes we've got requirements within security systems that we do have to be integrating with building management systems or whatever, and then we'll put in an RFI about, well, what systems, are you going to be having? Well, we don't know yet because that hasn't been selected. Well, now you've got one equation with multiple unknowns, and now you start carrying risk numbers. Sometimes it may even undermine the ability to provide or guarantee an integrated solution if integration into some of those third-party systems is an unknown. So at least knowing what the range of possibility of what those systems are, so that at least the integrator has the confidence that, well, regardless of which one of those BMSs are selected from another trade, we know that we're safe in going with a particular solution. We'll integrate with them. Might be a little bit more complex, than other solutions, but at least we know it's not going to be a dead end. So, again, it's really important, on the front end to have, as much clarity of what the intent of the consultant is that he's writing to, and to really drive home the fact that, that we need to be carrying some time. At the very least, we need to be carrying some time for some of these coordination meetings with these other trades and these, and an integrator that is coming in, looking to, to pepper, a project, with change orders because he's going to go to the letter of exactly the section that he was given. You don't want to lose a job like that because you're thinking too much, and you don't want the end user or the GC to be selecting somebody on a basis of an assumption, that they're really getting that level of coordination to those other trades, because they knew that they were trying to come in with a low number and then hit them with the gotchas afterwards that they didn't specify that. So the consultant can really help us avoid those, those gotchas down the road by being very clear that those are part of the integrator scope.
Greg, thought on that?
Well, I agree 100%. I mean, I think that the coordination is always the biggest challenge. It's rare that you get, no specifications are perfect. There's always ways to see through and around them. But that clarity that he's describing, that Jim's describing, is really essential. That's really what we're going for here, is sufficient clarity that someone, if they get an RFI, can answer it reasonably without essentially rewriting the spec on the fly. And I think that what's being described in terms of the consultant is actually probably the most important point there, because when you come into these kind of projects, as often as not, the lead architect, the project architect, doesn't have a clue about these systems, right? They're relying upon a design consultant of some kind, somebody like Jim Creel, to write the specifications for integration and installation of these systems, because they know doors and windows, but they may not know everything that needs to be attached to the door and the window to make it work in any kind of integrated fashion.
Okay, so thanks for that, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
So Jim Creel, let's follow up with what the question that Jim responded to in Jim's comments, and that is, simplicity versus complexity versus intent. Where's that sweet spot for you?
Well, it's somewhat project specific. So if I have a very large project with a lot of convoluted systems, with a lot of integration being required, unfortunately, this brevity is not your friend in the specifications, because it's really hard to describe some of that information on drawings. Or you would have drawings that are 200 pages deep, trying to show every possible interconnection that could happen. So to me, what I first look at is, what level of project is this? Is this a level of project that has some fairly straightforward siloed systems that that a typical integrator should be able to, I don't want to say do in their sleep, but is in their sweet spot? Then all I really need to do in my specifications is make sure that the big picture stuff is included for them. And when we when we talked about this last week, Jim Henry brought up something, and I kind of had to cringe because I've been guilty of this before, which is those famous statements like, "and provide everything else that may be required that hasn't been shown here." Those guys. Well, and that's an engineer's attempt at brevity, but unfortunately, it probably is not all that helpful to the integrator. But the point being, our job is not to tell the integrator how to do his job. Our job is to provide for the integrator a clear design intent that shows what the engineer, and obviously in collaboration with the owner, what they require and what they require the system to be able to do. And then to provide installation information that is important to the integrator, because they're going to have different levels and classes and qualifications of field installers out there. Not everybody pulling cable is going to be a Jim Henry. You're going to have guys that are wet behind the ears, and if you don't have some controlling information in your specifications, then it's hard to maintain the quality. I like what Greg said. He made that very distinct between the quality and the quantity. The specs really are intended to give the integrator, this is the quality level that I expect out of this installation and out of this integration. Mm-hmm. And so the sweet spot for me, Ray, is how complex I think the project is and to how deep into the specs I need to go. And again, it depends. Frank brought this up. Some of our projects are done with architects, and there's going to be a lot of players on the field. And then there are some projects we do directly with an owner, and we're going to handpick an integrator. And my specs don't need to be that complicated in that case, because I already know I already have my known elements. I know who I'm dealing with. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Great answer. Frank, we received a question in here that gets to something you mentioned before. So Anil asked, is it that the specifications have precedence over drawings? You seem to be suggesting the otherwise. So talk about specs versus drawings, and what's your lead punch? What do people default to in the absence of, let's say, you've got conflicting information?
If there's conflicting information, that's the designer's fault. I mean, in my opinion, I think it's very lazy to put a clause in your spec that says if there's a conflict between the specs and the drawings, the higher quantity takes precedence. That's a bunch of baloney. Yep. The specs and drawings are not superior to one versus the other. They need to be coordinated. They are equal, and they should all be representative of a single design. So that's that. I mean, one does not take precedence over the other.
Right. Thank you, Frank, for saying that, because that is true. That is CSI gospel right there. We always say they are equal and complementary, and they are designed to provide different types of information about the same outcomes. And you're absolutely, thank you for saying that. I think that and I also agree that it's lazy to do those kind of catch-alls, whatever. No, you're absolutely right. It's the designer's error if they don't agree. And if they don't agree, that is time for an RFI. That is time for a clarification of some kind. That's it.
Yeah, before a bid is submitted, because the other side of that coin is the unsavory integrators take advantage of the designer's lack of accuracy, bid the low, and come in with a change order later. So that's also a problem. Yeah. But I think that it's also in the construction of your documentation too, and not creating dependent conditions between the spec and the drawing, that if you make a change on one side, you have to go back and make a change on the drawing as well. So those are just strategies that you learn over time when you make mistakes and you realize, I've got a conflict and it's my fault and I own that responsibility. So you've got to be very, very careful. This design business is high risk and high reward.
Yeah, from the integrator's perspective, conflict between the two definitely is problematic. But the integrators understand, and actually, I think, invite the specifications being supplemental information to what the drawings, the drawing documents show. And quite honestly, the more that is flaunted and defined, in the spec section, helps us, to mitigate the problem where if the project is coming from a GC, that they fall back and figure, well, I got a riser diagram here, it's got counts, that's really that's what I'm looking for a number for. So the more elaborate that subjective area talking about the integrations and those requirements for integration and coordination can be defined within the specifications, the more the integrator has a footing, to be able to carry the necessary time and expertise that they need to make that happen.
So, Jim, to follow up on that, get your take, and then Frank and Jim Creel. Dave Miller says, my experience has been that the PM and salesperson for the integrator may read the specs, but the field techs rely almost exclusively on the drawings. What are thoughts on providing notes on drawings that drive them back to the specs? Is that what you find your field techs doing, just relying strictly on the drawings, or did you have a PM that oversaw that, rode herd on them? What was your experience? And then we'll get the consultant's take on it.
Oh, things happen, right? Even the best intent, is to communicate, that out there. The larger you get, sometimes that becomes more difficult on big projects, or when you have a project that goes many, many years and it gets handed off from PM team to PM team and whatnot. So it's a continued communications effort out there into the field to make sure that is communicated. But that's the integrator's responsibility for those internal communications, and to see that occurs and that it is monitored, throughout the process. And as we had, was commented on another call a little while ago, if there's any visibility of that occurring out there in the field, bad news doesn't get better with age, only wine does. Pick up the phone and call and say, I think we got a problem out there where this is not flowing out into the field, and that's the time to correct it is immediately, upon seat. But again, that's where the value of participating in all of these coordination meetings and these project meetings occurs, because that's where you catch it early and it can be corrected.
Okay, so Jim Creel, do you really think about the installers you're writing those specs and putting those drawings together, or are you relying upon an integrator's PM to push that out to the guy actually doing the install?
No, we absolutely think about it. And one of the things that I preach to all the young guys is duplication is your enemy. If you have something that you duplicate between the drawings and the specs, I can almost assure you at some point you're going to change one and forget the other. And so you really have to have the right mindset when you're putting a project together as what you intend to convey on the specs versus what do you intend to convey on the drawings. And, if it's a fairly small project, this is why, again, I say the more you can put on the drawings, the better, because in my experience, and I'm making a generalization here, but for smaller projects, the drawings pretty much become the Bible for the job. That's the thing that most of the guys out there are looking at. They develop their counts from when they're doing their estimating, putting their bids together. And that's what the guy out there in the field, if he's pulling cable and you don't have details about you want it in conduit and you want conduit within 10 feet of the cable tray, that guy out there isn't going to be reading the specs to figure out what you wanted for conduit on that job. So you absolutely have to think about, how do I expect this job to be built? And then to tailor your drawings and specifications around that expectation.
Real good point. So in the last few minutes that we have here, I want to bring the discussion now back more specifically to integrated systems. We talked about the fact that consultants have the flexibility if an existing CSI category doesn't work. There are procedures for defining your own category. Matt Peterworth asked, where can I get more information on that? It's in the master format document. There's also in the 2805 area, there's a systems integration and unified systems bullet. You can use that. And then Greg, you talked about, the forthcoming effort at CSI. So, having been through the process with your master format committee on Division 28 a couple of times myself, and, knowing the expertise that you have on that, now you've got Division 25 that hasn't been touched in a while. You've got Division 20 that is going to do a coordination that you're thinking about, that you're going to have to pull expertise in from a variety of places. So
sure.
how are you going to go about that? And how can people in this industry get involved with you to give you their input to that?
So I can't give any guarantees only because we're very early in the process. So this is just how we usually do it. Okay. We'll work close in hand with some experts, some folks we have coordination and work with. Ray, you'll probably be among them, and you can grab whoever you like to help with that. This is just for the initial drafting point, because we also have a ton of engineers already on the committee, and most of them have thoughts about Division 25 in particular. We also have quite a few architects, and most of them have a lot of thoughts about this Division 20 process and coordination area. But the biggest area where folks will be able to have feedback is for both of these. I have put in a recommendation that we make a public draft for comment available for probably about 60 days to get people to write in where they think we, didn't quite do it the way they think it should be done. And then we can, we can react to that. We can respond to this. We've done that many, many times in the past. And at this level of development, as opposed to the usual addition to addition, changes in titles and things, where it's a broader change like that, that's usually what we try to do, is have a draft for comment. And the place to keep an eye on that will be on the CSI website. And you can go to the CSI website, you can sign up. If you don't feel like visiting the CSI website every month, I understand. You can sign up for some of our, we have some very lightweight, emails that go out on a regular basis that give you latest news about things that are happening at the Institute. And they go out on a weekly basis. You can get them condensed and have them delivered monthly, things like that. But what that'll do is that's the kind of place where we would announce the opening of a commentary period.
Well, as your efforts continue, please, I hope that we can stay together, because I would like to pass that information on to all the consultants on the call here, so
Right.
they have the opportunity to get involved. And Greg, also, if somebody felt they needed some brushing up on master format, or wanted to dive deeper into the construction specification process with self-study or whatever, just what resources are available from you to be able to do that?
Well, I'll tell you, I already pointed out the practice guide. And like I said, the new one will be coming out probably in the first quarter of next year. So I would definitely look to that for specifications and for specification specific information. If you need a more general brush up, the Project Delivery Practice Guide 3rd edition came out this year. That's another great resource, as you've already mentioned, Ray. Deals with everything about project delivery, the requirements of different participants, the teams that they belong to, and what they bring to the process. It also goes into detail about things like submittals and stuff like that, and all of which are tremendously important on understanding the procurement and contracting processes. And then beyond that, there's a lot of educational material available, again, through CSI. That's where I know things. But we just launched something called Specs 101, which is it's made up of 6 chapters, 6 videos. I think we've gotten up through chapter 3 so far out on the site. So CSI, check in there at the website, go to the learning library, register, and some of this stuff is free, some of it's not, but take a look around. That's where we offer a lot of this type of information that is at varying levels, right? Specs 101 is very much about, like, what are specifications? How do I write them? How do I interpret them? Things like that. But many of them are much more detailed than the practice guide in particular.
Thank you, Greg. I will make mention of the fact that, these are the kinds of issues that we talk about at the live consult. And there have been a lot of great questions posed here that we just couldn't get to today. And we'll take those and perhaps use some of those as the basis for our sessions next October in San Antonio, when, God willing, we can actually travel and go. Greg was on tap to be at our live event this year. Hopefully, Greg, we can get you next year to come out and do that. So, we've got just about a minute left. Jim Creel, Frank, Jim Henry, anybody want to raise their hand and provide a parting comment?
I'll throw in. I'd just like to say appreciate Greg for and CSI for the flexibility that that they're showing and adapting to the adapting world that we live in. And one suggestion I made on a pre-call is integrators would love to have a measure. If we're dealing with a consultant that already has we have an experience with this, then we know how adept they are in utilizing the format. But if we're dealing with a consulting firm that we don't know, then having some sort of a grading system or a driver's license for what level of expertise you do have with CSI. Is it a consultant that just has the numbers and sections, or is it one that really has a full understanding of the toolkit there and is using it appropriately?
Thank you, Jim. So with that, our time has expired. I want to thank you all for joining the session. I thought the discussion was really worthwhile, and certainly there's a lot more fodder for further discussion as we go and have future sessions and our future event. So I'd like to thank Greg, you and CSI for being here, Frank Bashada, Jim Creel, and my very good friend Jim Henry for your keen insights. I thought that they were really excellent.